The evening air was still, heavy with the scent of damp earth and fallen leaves. Arlington National Cemetery stretched far and wide, its endless rows of white headstones standing like silent sentinels beneath the fading sun. Visitors walked through the sacred grounds, some carrying flowers, others whispering prayers for those who had given everything. But among them, one sight never changed: a small golden-furred puppy, curled up beside a single grave. The little dog sat there every evening, his ears perked, his brown eyes fixed on the name carved into the stone. SGT, Daniel Carter, 1996 to 2024. A hero, a brother, a friend. No leash. No collar. No owner in sight. Just a tiny, loyal heart refusing to leave. People had tried to coax him away. A kind old man had brought him food. A young girl had kneeled beside him, whispering soft words of comfort. But the puppy never budged. Even when it rained, even when the cold winds of winter rolled in, he remained there, waiting. For what? For someone who would never return. An elderly veteran, visiting his fallen comrades, watched the puppy with a heavy heart. He sighed, kneeling beside him. "You're waiting for him, aren't you, boy?" he murmured. The puppy didn't react, just lowered his head onto his paws. The man ran a trembling hand over the gravestone. "I knew a soldier once, just like you know yours. And just like you, I never stopped waiting for him either." A sharp gust of wind blew through the cemetery, rustling the leaves, carrying whispers of the past. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, the puppy stayed, unmoving, his small frame a testament to a love unbroken by death. He was waiting, just like he had promised. The summer breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass as Daniel leaned against the old oak tree in his backyard. His army boots were loosely laced, his uniform still crisp from his return home. For the first time in months, he felt something close to peace. The weight of war clung to him like a shadow, but here, in the warmth of his childhood home, he could finally breathe. Emily, his younger sister, had been waiting eagerly for his return. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment, convinced that she had found the perfect way to bring joy back into her brother's weary eyes. "I have a surprise for you," she said, her voice filled with excitement. She grabbed his hand and led him toward the small wooden shed at the back of their house. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "A surprise, huh? Should I be worried?" Emily just grinned. She pushed open the shed door, and a tiny ball of golden fur stumbled forward, its tail wagging clumsily. The little puppy, no more than a few weeks old, let out a soft yip before tumbling over its own paws. Daniel's heart clenched. The puppy looked up at him with wide, trusting eyes, as if sensing something in him that even he couldn't understand. Emily knelt beside the tiny creature, scooping it up in her arms. "Meet Hero," she announced proudly. "I named him after you." Daniel let out a soft chuckle, rubbing the pup's ears. "Hero, huh? That's a big name for such a little guy." The puppy barked in response, wiggling in Emily's grasp until she placed him on the ground. Hero immediately scampered over to Daniel, pressing his tiny nose against his boots. Something inside Daniel shifted. For months, he had been surrounded by chaos, by the relentless rhythm of war. His mind had been consumed with battle strategies, with the faces of those he had lost. But here, with this tiny creature nudging against him, something inside him cracked open, a warmth he hadn't felt in a long time. Emily watched her brother closely. "You need him, Danny," she said softly. "And he needs you." Daniel exhaled, running a hand through his short-cropped hair. "I don't know if I can." "You can," Emily interrupted, her voice firm. "Just give him a chance." Hero, as if understanding the weight of the moment, rested his small paw on Daniel's boot. And just like that, something unspoken passed between them. From that day forward, Hero became Daniel's shadow. Wherever he went, the little pup followed, tumbling after him with unsteady legs, yipping happily whenever Daniel returned from his morning runs. At night, when the world grew too quiet and Daniel's demons threatened to creep in, Hero curled up beside him, a small but steady presence that reminded him he wasn't alone. One evening, as Daniel sat on the porch watching the Texas sunset, Hero jumped onto his lap, licking his chin with tiny, excited kisses. "You're not so bad, are you, little guy?" Daniel murmured, scratching behind the pup's ears. Hero let out a happy yip, curling into his chest. Emily, watching from the doorway, smiled. She had been right. Daniel needed Hero just as much as Hero needed him. But peace was fleeting, and goodbyes always came too soon. The morning of his departure was quiet. Too quiet. The usual sounds of the Texas countryside, the chirping birds, the rustling leaves, felt muted, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Daniel's bag was packed. His uniform was pressed. The car that would take him back to the base was already waiting in the driveway. Hero sat beside his boots, his tiny ears drooping. Daniel crouched down, ruffling the pup's soft fur. "I'll be back soon, buddy." His voice was steady, but there was an ache behind it. "You take care of Emily for me, all right?" Hero whimpered, nudging his wet nose against Daniel's hand. Emily knelt beside them, wrapping her arms around the little dog. "We'll be waiting," she whispered. Daniel hesitated. He had been trained to say goodbye, to keep his emotions in check. But as he looked into Hero's eyes, those same trusting eyes that had looked up at him the day they met, his heart clenched. With one last pat on the pup's head, he stood up, slinging his bag over his shoulder. Hero let out a small bark as Daniel turned away. Emily held the puppy close, whispering soft reassurances. But as she watched her brother walk toward the waiting car, a heavy feeling settled in her chest. She had a bad feeling about this goodbye. And deep down, so did Hero. The world moved on, but for Hero, time had frozen. Days blurred into nights, and nights stretched into an endless wait. The tiny golden-furred puppy sat by the front door, ears perked at every passing car, eyes scanning every shadow in the fading daylight. He waited for the sound of Daniel's boots, for his deep, comforting voice, for the warmth of the arms that had held him so gently. But Daniel didn't return. Emily watched as Hero paced the front porch, his tiny paws leaving imprints in the dust. Every morning, he would run to the gate, his tail wagging in hopeful anticipation. And every night, he would return to Daniel's empty room, curling up in the spot where his best friend used to sleep. It broke Emily's heart. She tried everything to distract him, long walks, new toys, belly rubs, but nothing could fill the void Daniel had left behind. Hero would play for a moment, but the second a car engine rumbled in the distance, his head would snap up, ears twitching, and he would sprint toward the road searching, hoping. But Daniel was thousands of miles away. A soldier's reality. Daniel adjusted the strap of his rifle, the weight of his gear pressing down on his shoulders. The air was thick with dust, the distant echoes of gunfire a constant reminder that he was far from home. He tried to focus on the mission, on the orders being given, but his thoughts kept drifting back to Texas, to the little house with the wooden porch, to Emily's laughter, and to the small bundle of fur that had stolen his heart. Every time he had a moment of peace, he found himself reaching for his pocket, where he kept a folded picture of Hero. Emily had sent it in her last letter. In the photo, Hero was sitting by the front porch, ears perked up, staring straight at the camera. The caption below read, "Still waiting for his best friend." Daniel swallowed the lump in his throat. He had known leaving would be hard. He had prepared for the distance, for the sacrifices. But he hadn't realized how much a tiny, golden puppy could make his chest ache with longing. At night, when the barracks were quiet, and the weight of war settled heavily on his shoulders, he would close his eyes and picture Hero curled up beside him. He could almost feel the soft fur beneath his fingers, hear the excited yips that had once filled his home. One of his fellow soldiers, Carter, nudged him. "You good, man?" Daniel forced a small smile. "Yeah. Just thinking about home." Carter nodded. "That's what keeps us going." Daniel exhaled slowly. He just had to make it through this deployment. Then he could go home. To Emily. To Hero. Hero's devotion. Months passed. Seasons changed. And Hero kept waiting. Emily had taken him to town once, hoping a change of scenery would help. But the moment they returned home, Hero bolted to the porch, sniffing frantically at the spot where Daniel used to sit. Emily sighed, kneeling beside him. "I miss him too, buddy." She ran her fingers through his fur, feeling the steady thump of his little heart. She had heard stories about loyal dogs before, about Hachiko in Japan, who had waited years for his owner, and about other faithful companions who had never given up hope. But she never thought she would witness such devotion firsthand. Hero wasn't just a pet. He was family. And he was waiting for his best friend to come home. But fate had other plans. The knock on the door. It was an ordinary afternoon when Emily heard the knock. She wiped her hands on a dish towel, frowning at the unexpected visitor. Hero, sensing something, perked up beside her. When she opened the door, 2 uniformed officers stood on the porch. Her breath hitched. One of them held a neatly folded American flag. The world tilted. She barely heard their words. "We regret to inform you. Your brother was a hero. He saved his unit, but he didn't make it." Emily's knees buckled, and she clutched the doorframe for support. Hero let out a soft whimper, pawing at her leg. She didn't know how long she stood there, listening to words that shattered her world. She didn't know how she managed to nod, to accept the flag that now carried the weight of her brother's sacrifice. But she did know one thing. Hero understood. Because when the officers left, and the door shut, the tiny golden pup turned and ran. Straight to the front porch. Straight to the spot where Daniel always sat. And there, he lay down, letting out a long, sorrowful whimper. For the first time since Daniel left, Hero stopped wagging his tail. He stopped looking at the road. He just lay there, waiting. The journey to Arlington. The funeral was held at Arlington National Cemetery, a resting place for heroes. Emily held onto the folded flag tightly, her knuckles white from the grip. Hero sat beside her, silent and still, as if sensing the solemnity of the moment. When Daniel's casket was lowered into the ground, Hero let out a low, heart-wrenching cry. And then, without hesitation, he moved. Slipping from Emily's grasp, the little pup trotted toward the grave, his tiny body trembling. He lay down beside it, pressing his warm body against the cold earth. Emily tried to call him back, but Hero wouldn't move. Not that day. Not the next. Not for a long time. An unbreakable bond. Days turned into weeks. Visitors to the cemetery started noticing this small, golden-furred puppy sitting beside Daniel's grave. Some tried to lure him away with treats, but Hero refused to leave. Veterans knelt beside him, whispering words of gratitude. Families of fallen soldiers left food and water, their own hearts aching at the sight of such devotion. But Hero didn't care for food or attention. He just wanted Daniel back. Emily visited every day, sitting beside Hero, telling him stories about Daniel. "He loved you so much," she whispered one evening, her fingers stroking Hero's fur. "He always asked about you." Hero whimpered, nudging his nose against the headstone. Emily wiped a tear from her cheek. "You're a hero too, you know." The wind rustled the trees, and for a fleeting moment, she could almost hear Daniel's voice. "Take care of him, just like he took care of me." And for the first time, Hero lifted his head, looking at Emily with those deep, trusting eyes. As if he understood. As if he knew that Daniel was gone, but that love, true love, never really left. It just found a new way to stay. The days passed slowly, and Hero remained at Daniel's grave, refusing to leave. The cemetery staff had grown accustomed to the sight of the loyal puppy curled up beside the white headstone. Some tried to take him away, offering him food, warmth, and shelter, but each time, he found his way back. Emily visited often, sitting beside Hero, telling him stories about Daniel. She spoke about the way he used to chase fireflies with her when they were kids, how he always protected her from bullies, how he dreamed of becoming a soldier since he was young. Hero listened, his ears twitching at the sound of Daniel's name, his brown eyes filled with longing and confusion. One evening, as Emily sat there, a stranger approached her. He was a man in his late 30s, dressed in a military uniform, his face worn and weary. A deep scar ran along his left cheek, and his eyes carried the weight of war. "Are you Daniel Carter's sister?" the man asked, his voice gruff but gentle. Emily nodded, wiping away a stray tear. "Yes." "Who are you?" The man knelt beside her, his gaze shifting to Hero. "My name is Sergeant James Holloway. I served with your brother. And if it weren't for him, I wouldn't be here today." Emily's breath hitched. "You knew Daniel?" James nodded solemnly. "He was my best friend out there. We fought side by side. And when the ambush happened, he saved me." Hero whimpered, as if sensing the weight of James's words. James took a shaky breath. "We were on a routine mission in the mountains. Everything was quiet, too quiet. Then, out of nowhere, gunfire erupted. We were trapped. Daniel took the lead, as he always did. He pulled us into cover, barking orders, keeping everyone focused. But then, a grenade landed right near us. I didn't see it in time." "He did?" Emily's hands trembled. "He pushed me out of the way. Took the blast himself. And even as he lay there, bleeding, he still managed to fire back, covering the rest of us. He made sure we got out." A sob escaped Emily's lips. "He was always protecting others." James placed a hand on her shoulder. "He told me about you. About this little guy, too." He motioned to Hero. "Said he had a dog waiting for him back home. Said he couldn't wait to get back to both of you." Tears streamed down Emily's face. Hero nudged her hand with his wet nose, as if trying to comfort her. James reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. "Before he passed, he told me to give this to you. I couldn't bring myself to do it sooner. But when I heard about Hero, about how he's been waiting here, I knew I had to come." Emily's fingers shook as she took the letter. It was worn, creased at the edges, but Daniel's familiar handwriting greeted her. She unfolded it slowly and read. "Em, if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it home. I'm sorry. I wanted nothing more than to come back to you and Hero. But if I couldn't, I needed you to know something. You were always my light. When things got dark, I thought about you and knew I had to keep going. You made me stronger than I ever was alone. I wish I could have one more day with you, to laugh, to tease you about your terrible cooking, to remind you that you'll always be my little sister. Take care of Hero for me. I know he'll take care of you in return. He was never just a dog. He was part of our family. I hope he doesn't wait too long for me. Tell him I love him, just as much as I love you. Daniel. Emily pressed the letter to her chest, sobs racking her body. Hero let out a small, mournful howl, his tiny frame shaking against her. James stayed beside her, his own eyes misty. He was a hero, Emily. The bravest man I ever knew. She nodded through her tears. And now, Hero won't leave because he's still waiting for him. James exhaled heavily. Maybe he knows. Maybe he just wants to stay close, even if Daniel isn't coming back. That night, as the cemetery lights flickered against the cold air, Hero lay curled beside the grave, Emily's hand resting on his back. She knew that no matter how much time passed, Hero would always be waiting. And somehow, deep down, she understood. To Hero, Daniel wasn't truly gone. He was just out there somewhere, waiting to come home. Winter had fully set in, blanketing Arlington Cemetery in a thick layer of snow. The cold wind howled through the trees, sending chills through the visitors who passed by the countless white headstones. Yet, amidst the vast, solemn landscape, Hero remained unmoving by Daniel's grave. His once vibrant golden fur was now dusted with frost, his body curled up tightly against the unyielding cold. Emily watched from a distance, her breath forming soft clouds in the air. She had been coming to visit Hero every day, bringing food and water, yet the little dog barely acknowledged her presence. His eyes, once filled with boundless puppy energy, were now dull and distant. He wasn't just mourning. He was waiting. That night, as darkness settled, a snowstorm rolled in. The cemetery staff debated bringing Hero inside, but as soon as anyone approached, the small dog would retreat, pressing himself against the headstone as if it were his last remaining warmth in the world. There was something hauntingly unshakable about his devotion, a love so deep, so raw, that it defied even the harshest conditions. Word of Hero's vigil had spread beyond Arlington. News stations picked up the story of the dog who never forgot. Strangers across the country sent blankets, food, and donations to care for him. Soldiers who had once served with Daniel came to pay their respects, kneeling beside Hero and whispering words that only the dog could hear. One evening, an older man arrived at the cemetery. He wore a long, heavy coat, but it was his eyes that held the true weight, tired, war-weary, filled with memories that never faded. His name was Sergeant James Walker, a veteran who had served with Daniel during his final deployment. Emily was there when Walker arrived. She watched as he slowly approached Hero, kneeling beside the shivering dog. "Hey there, buddy," Walker murmured, his voice gentle yet firm. "You remember me, don't you?" Hero lifted his head slightly, his ears twitching at the familiar tone. He sniffed the air, recognition flickering in his eyes. Walker reached into his coat and pulled out a small, folded piece of fabric. A scrap of Daniel's uniform, torn and worn from battle. "I was there, you know," Walker continued, voice thick with emotion. "I was there when he saved me. Your boy, Hero, he was brave. Braver than anyone I've ever known." Emily felt her heart tighten. She had heard pieces of the story before, but never from someone who had been there, someone who had witnessed her brother's final moments. "He talked about you, pup," Walker whispered. "In the middle of the fight, when things got bad, he told me about his dog named Hero. Said you were a little rascal, always chewing on his boots, always waiting at the door for him to come home. He wanted to make it back to you. To you and his sister." Hero let out a small whimper, nudging the fabric with his nose. It smelled like Daniel. Like the past. Like something lost and never found. Walker sighed, looking up at Emily. "Your brother was a hero in every sense of the word. And I know if he were here right now, he'd tell this little guy that it's okay to move on. That waiting won't bring him back." Emily wiped at her tears. "I've been trying to take him home," she admitted, voice shaking. "But he won't leave. I don't know how to make him understand." Walker studied Hero for a long moment before nodding. "Then maybe he just needs to hear it from Daniel." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, weathered letter. "Your brother wrote this before his last mission. He asked me to send it to you if anything happened. I never had the courage to until now." Emily's hands trembled as she took the letter. She unfolded the delicate paper, her brother's familiar handwriting filling the page. "Dear Emily, if you're reading this, I didn't make it home. I'm sorry. I wanted nothing more than to walk through that door again, to ruffle Hero's fur, to tease you about your terrible taste in movies. But war is unpredictable, and if this letter reaches you, then fate had other plans for me. I need you to do something for me, Em. Take care of Hero. He's a stubborn little thing, and I know he'll wait for me until the end of time. But I need him to know that it's okay to let go. I need you to tell him that I love him, and that even if I'm not there to throw the ball or scratch his ears, I'll always be with him in spirit. Tell him he was a good boy. The best boy. And tell yourself the same. Because you, Em, you were the best sister a guy could ask for. Love you always, Daniel." Tears slipped down Emily's cheeks as she finished reading. The weight of her brother's words settled into her chest, both painful and comforting all at once. She knelt beside Hero, running her fingers through his frozen fur. "Did you hear that, buddy?" she whispered. "Daniel wanted you to know that it's okay. He loves you. And he wants you to come home." Hero stared at her for a long moment. Then, for the first time in months, he let out a soft, sorrowful cry. It was a sound of mourning, of love, of understanding. He nudged the letter with his nose. Then, ever so slowly, he turned his gaze away from the grave, toward Emily. And in that single movement, Emily knew. Hero was ready. The first snow of the season had begun to fall over Arlington National Cemetery. The gentle flakes settled over the rows of white headstones, turning the landscape into a solemn sea of white. Visitors walked in hushed reverence, their breaths forming small clouds in the cold air. But as always, in the same spot as every day before, Hero lay curled up beside Daniel Carter's grave, his golden fur dusted with snowflakes. Emily watched from a distance, clutching her brother's old army jacket around herself. It had been nearly a year since Daniel's passing, and still, Hero refused to leave. She knelt beside him, running her fingers through his thick fur. His body shivered slightly from the cold, but he did not move from his place. "Hero," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You can't stay here forever." The little dog lifted his head, his deep brown eyes filled with something that looked like sorrow and understanding. Emily swallowed the lump in her throat and reached into her pocket, pulling out an old, crumpled letter, the last one Daniel had sent before he died. She unfolded it carefully and began to read aloud. "Hey, Em. If you're reading this, it means I didn't make it back. I hate that I have to write this, but I need you to know something. War teaches you a lot of things. It teaches you fear. It teaches you loss. But it also teaches you love. And if I learned one thing from all of this, it's that love never dies." Emily paused, glancing at Hero, who had perked his ears as if he, too, was listening. "Take care of Hero for me, okay? He's not just a dog. He's family. He'll never stop waiting for me. But I need him to know it's okay to move on. I need you to know that too." A tear slipped down Emily's cheek. She looked at Hero again and placed a gentle hand over his heart. "He wouldn't want you to stay here, Hero. He'd want you to come home." For a long moment, Hero didn't move. Then, for the first time in nearly a year, he turned away from the grave and looked at her. It was as if something inside him had finally shifted. Slowly he stood, stepping forward with tentative, shaky legs. Emily picked him up, holding him close as she stood. She turned one last time to look at her brother's headstone. "I'll take care of him, Daniel. I promise." A soft gust of wind brushed past her, rustling the trees, and for a fleeting moment, she swore she heard her brother's voice. "Take care of him, just like he took care of me." As Emily walked away, Hero buried his head into her shoulder, finally allowing himself to rest. And for the first time in a long time, the little dog, who had never stopped waiting, was finally going home. "Hey, Em. If you're reading this, it means I didn't make it back. I hate that I have to write this, but I need you to know something. War teaches you a lot of things. It teaches you fear. It teaches you loss. But it also teaches you love. And if I learned one thing from all of this, it's that love never dies." Emily paused, glancing at Hero, who had perked his ears as if he, too, was listening. "Take care of Hero for me, okay? He's not just a dog. He's family. He'll never stop waiting for me. But I need him to know it's okay to move on. I need you to know that too." A tear slipped down Emily's cheek. She looked at Hero again and placed a gentle hand over his heart. "He wouldn't want you to stay here, Hero. He'd want you to come home." For a long moment, Hero didn't move. Then, for the first time in nearly a year, he turned away from the grave and looked at her. It was as if something inside him had finally shifted. Slowly he stood, stepping forward with tentative, shaky legs. Emily picked him up, holding him close as she stood. She turned one last time to look at her brother's headstone. "I'll take care of him, Daniel. I promise." A soft gust of wind brushed past her, rustling the trees, and for a fleeting moment, she swore she heard her brother's voice. "Take care of him, just like he took care of me." As Emily walked away, Hero buried his head into her shoulder, finally allowing himself to rest. And for the first time in a long time, the little dog, who had never stopped waiting, was finally going home. "Hey, Em. If you're reading this, it means I didn't make it back. I hate that I have to write this, but I need you to know something. War teaches you a lot of things. It teaches you fear. It teaches you loss. But it also teaches you love. And if I learned one thing from all of this, it's that love never dies." Emily paused, glancing at Hero, who had perked his ears as if he, too, was listening. "Take care of Hero for me, okay? He's not just a dog. He's family. He'll never stop waiting for me. But I need him to know it's okay to move on. I need you to know that too." A tear slipped down Emily's cheek. She looked at Hero again and placed a gentle hand over his heart. "He wouldn't want you to stay here, Hero. He'd want you to come home." For a long moment, Hero didn't move. Then, for the first time in nearly a year, he turned away from the grave and looked at her. It was as if something inside him had finally shifted. Slowly he stood, stepping forward with tentative, shaky legs. Emily picked him up, holding him close as she stood. She turned one last time to look at her brother's headstone. "I'll take care of him, Daniel. I promise." A soft gust of wind brushed past her, rustling the trees, and for a fleeting moment, she swore she heard her brother's voice. "Take care of him, just like he took care of me." As Emily walked away, Hero buried his head into her shoulder, finally allowing himself to rest. And for the first time in a long time, the little dog, who had never stopped waiting, was finally going home.